I can't believe I paid to sit by a poor grandma.
I can't believe I paid to sit by a poor grandma. Richard's voice exploded inside the crowded cabin. The millionaire CEO laughed loud, flashing his gold watch as passengers turned their heads. Beside him, the elderly woman lowered her gaze, clutching her worn purse tighter, silence pressing against her chest. He leaned back, smug. His first-class seat had been cancelled by a technical error, forcing him into economy, a punishment he refused to accept. Now trapped in a narrow row, he mocked the silver-haired stranger beside him, hungry for an audience. But the calm in her eyes held a weight he didn't understand, a weight that would soon decide whether he lived or died. Before we begin this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city you are watching, and don't forget to leave your like to keep following us. The cabin air carried the faint sting of recycled coffee and antiseptic wipes. Passengers shifted in their narrow seats, their shoulders brushing against strangers, their knees pressed against tray tables that rattled with every bump of turbulence. Richard Collins sank back into his economy seat with the disgust of a man tasting spoiled wine. His jaw clenched as though he were chewing on humiliation itself. He tugged at his tailored jacket, the fabric clearly made for a wider chair, not this cramped row of anonymity. He let out a loud sigh, making sure everyone within 3 rows could hear. Unbelievable, he muttered, though it was no whisper. A billionaire forced into economy. Do you people understand how absurd this is? His laugh was sharp, theatrical. A teenage girl 2 seats ahead twisted in her chair to glance, her earbuds dangling forgotten. The woman beside him, frail at first glance, silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears, remained unmoved. Her cardigan sleeves were pulled over thin wrists, her hands resting on her lap with the stillness of folded wings. Richard noticed her ignoring him, and that seemed to offend him more than anything. He leaned closer, lowering his voice but sharpening the edges. You must be thrilled, huh? Sitting next to someone like me. Maybe you'll tell your bridge club about it. Poor grandma with a front row seat to greatness. He chuckled, tapping his Rolex against the armrest, each click like a gavel announcing her supposed inferiority. She turned, finally, her eyes catching his. They were not weak, not timid. There was a steadiness there, quiet but immovable, like old stone. Her voice came soft, almost a whisper lost in the engine's roar. We're all just passengers here, son. No one more, no one less. The words landed heavier than she intended. Richard blinked, momentarily robbed of his retort. Then his smirk returned, exaggerated, desperate to mask the sting. Passengers, please. Some of us are on this flight to make history. Others, well, they're just along for the ride. He turned away with a scoff, yanking at the tray table, letting it slam back into place with a hollow thud. The flight attendant, Chloe, appeared at the row, her practiced smile trembling at the edges. Sir, is everything all right here? She asked carefully, her eyes flicking from his polished shoes to the woman's quiet poise. Richard leaned back, stretching like a lion in a cage. Everything's perfect, just bonding with my seatmate. He gestured with a flourish, his sarcasm dripping into the narrow aisle. Chloe held her breath for a beat, then nodded and stepped away, though the frown never left her face. Silence settled like dust. The hum of the engines filled the void. Outside, a wall of clouds loomed closer, grey and swollen, the plane slipping into their shadow. Evelyn Parker, the poor grandma to Richard's eyes, kept her gaze fixed on that horizon, her mind somewhere far beyond the arrogance beside her. Richard shifted again, restless, his knee bouncing, his breath quickening. He didn't know why his chest suddenly felt tight, why the air seemed thinner. He swallowed hard, blaming the cabin pressure, refusing to admit the unease clawing at him from the inside. And then, without warning, a bead of sweat rolled down his temple, unnoticed by him, but not by Evelyn. The seatbelt sign blinked on as the aircraft jolted, shuddering against a gust of wind. A low murmur spread through the cabin. Overhead, bins rattled. A child whimpered somewhere behind them, her mother whispering comfort. Richard let out an exaggerated groan, as though even turbulence was beneath him. Figures, economy seats, and turbulence. This day just keeps getting worse. He pulled at his collar, sweat dampening the silk. He didn't notice how his hand trembled when he reached for the glass of water the attendant had left earlier. The water sloshed, spilling over the rim onto his lap. His curse echoed down the row. Evelyn Parker remained still, her gaze anchored outside the small oval window. Lightning licked at the horizon, a pale vein splitting the sky. She exhaled slowly, the way one does when counting heartbeats. Richard shifted again, his leg bouncing faster. He pressed his thumb into the space beneath his ribs, annoyed by the dull ache gnawing there. "Are you all right?" Evelyn asked softly, turning toward him. Richard snapped his head around, his eyes flashing irritation. "Do I look all right? This airline couldn't even keep my first-class seat. I should be closing a contract worth more than your retirement savings right now." His laugh was hollow, forced, like glass about to crack. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes studied his face. The sheen of sweat, the shallow rise of his chest. She knew the signs, she had seen them countless times before, but she said nothing yet, not while he still wore his armor of arrogance. A sudden jolt pitched the plane downward for a breath, oxygen masks swaying slightly above. Gasps filled the air. Richard clutched at the armrest, his face blanching, then flushing red. He drew in a sharp breath, as though the air itself betrayed him. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks. The teenage girl from earlier whispered, "Is he okay?" Her father hushed her, watching with wary eyes. Richard's hand went to his chest, fingers clawing at the expensive fabric. He leaned forward, coughing, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. "Damn air pressure," he muttered, though his voice cracked. His body betrayed him, the weakness too loud to disguise. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice firm now. "Sir, you need to slow your breathing." "Don't tell me what to do," he snapped, though the bite was weaker this time. His words dissolved into a rasp. His other hand groped for the call button, missing it twice before he slammed it with his palm. Chloe, the attendant, appeared quickly, her practiced calm slipping as she took in Richard's trembling hands and the way his chest heaved. "Sir, are you in pain?" "I just need—" he began, but the sentence broke apart. His eyes widened, pupils swimming in panic. The sound of his wheezing filled the narrow row. Passengers straightened in their seats, the tension rising like a held breath. Chloe glanced around, desperation shadowing her face. "We might need medical assistance. Does anyone here happen to be a doctor?" The question hung in the air unanswered. Heads turned, searching, waiting. Richard slumped back, the strength draining from his body. His gold watch slid down his wrist as his arm dangled lifelessly toward the aisle. Evelyn's hands gripped the armrest, steady but urgent, her eyes never leaving him. And then she inhaled deeply, as if preparing to cross a threshold she had not touched in years. Richard's chest heaved, shallow and uneven, like an engine choking on its last drops of fuel. His eyes darted wildly, trying to find control in the chaos of his own body. The air felt heavier, too thick, pressing against him as though the entire cabin had shrunk to a coffin. Chloe crouched by his seat, her hand hovering close but unsure. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with me. Breathe slowly." Her voice trembled despite her training. The other passengers leaned out of their rows, their faces painted with alarm. A businessman unbuckled his seatbelt half an inch, as if ready to help but froze in hesitation. Richard tried to answer, but his words came out as a garbled whisper. "Contract important, I can't—" He gasped mid-sentence, clutching at his chest, his knuckles bone-white. His body lurched forward, then collapsed back against the seat, head rolling sideways, mouth slack. A collective gasp cut through the cabin. The young girl from earlier screamed. Her father pulled her close, eyes wide with fear. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, he's having a heart attack!" Panic swept the narrow rows like wildfire. Chloe raised her voice above the commotion. "Please, everyone remain calm. Is there a doctor on board?" She scanned the cabin desperately, her palms trembling. No one moved. A silence followed, suffocating and cruel. The seconds stretched too long. Then Evelyn's voice, steady and unshaken, broke the paralysis. "I'm a doctor, a cardiac surgeon, retired, but I know what to do." All eyes snapped toward her. The frail-looking grandmother, cardigan buttoned neatly to her chin, rose from her seat with surprising strength. She motioned firmly. "Help me lay him flat, now." Chloe blinked, startled. You're a surgeon? Evelyn didn't waste time with credentials. Her voice sharpened into command. Do you want him to live? Then help me move him. Two passengers leapt from their seats, following her instructions without question. They eased Richard onto the narrow aisle, his expensive shoes scuffing against the carpet. His head lolled, skin pale, lips tinged with blue. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, her movements precise, practiced, as though years had peeled away in an instant. She pressed her fingers against his carotid artery, her jaw tightening. Weak pulse. We're losing him. The cabin became a suspended world of silence, broken only by the whine of engines and the frantic rhythm of Evelyn's commands. Chloe, bring me the emergency kit. Oxygen if you have it. Chloe scrambled away, nearly tripping over a bag in her haste. Passengers shifted, whispering, their disbelief colliding with awe. The same woman Richard had mocked, dismissed as nothing, was now the only thing standing between him and death. Evelyn laced her fingers, placing them against his chest. She looked up at the two men crouched nearby. Count with me. 30 compressions, go. Her arms pumped with controlled force, the steady rise and fall echoing through the hushed cabin. 1, 2, 3. The numbers beat like a drum, carrying both urgency and authority. Sweat gathered at Evelyn's brow, but her voice never wavered. Each push pressed against not just his chest, but against the weight of every cruel word he had spoken. Passengers held their breath, united in helpless hope. Richard's lifeless body jerked slightly with each compression, his gold watch sliding further down his wrist. Evelyn leaned closer, her whisper just for him, though he could not hear. You're not done yet. The narrow aisle had become a battlefield. Passengers craned their necks over seats, holding their breath as Evelyn pressed down on Richard's chest with a rhythm that seemed to shake the entire row. Her face was set in concentration, her hands unyielding, her silver hair falling loose from its neat pin. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, she commanded. Chloe knelt beside her with the emergency kit, fumbling to open it. Evelyn's tone cut through her panic like a scalpel. Stay with me. Focus. She tilted Richard's head back, pinching his nose, sealing her lips over his. The cabin fell utterly silent at the sight, a frail grandmother breathing life into a man who had ridiculed her minutes ago. The hiss of recycled air and the groan of the engines were the only sounds, punctuated by Evelyn's urgent breaths. Richard's chest rose, then fell, limp. Evelyn pulled back, checking his pulse again, her jaw tightening. Still weak, we continue. She returned to compressions, her shoulders straining, every ounce of her strength poured into the fragile rhythm of survival. A man in a suit leaned forward, his voice shaking. Is he going to make it? Evelyn didn't look up. He doesn't have a choice. Her words were both command and prayer. Chloe snapped open the oxygen tank, her hands trembling. Evelyn guided her swiftly. Mask on his face. Turn the valve. Slow flow. The hiss of oxygen filled the space, a fragile lifeline tethering Richard back to the living. Around them, passengers had gone still. A young mother rocked her baby without realizing it, her eyes fixed on Evelyn. The teenage girl gripped her father's arm, whispering, She's saving him. The man only nodded, unable to look away. Richard's body jerked faintly under Evelyn's compressions, but his eyes remained shut, his lips still blue. Sweat trickled down Evelyn's temple, sliding into the creases of her skin. She ignored it, counting under her breath, the numbers steady as a metronome. After another cycle, she paused, her ear close to his mouth, her fingers pressed to his neck. Nothing. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply and pressed harder. Come on, she whispered, voice cracking for the first time. I've pulled too many hearts back from the edge to lose you now. Her hands moved faster, the pressure deeper, her entire body rocking with the effort. Chloe whispered a trembling prayer under her breath, clutching the edge of the seat. The cabin vibrated with the storm outside, lightning flashing through the small windows, casting harsh shadows across Evelyn's determined face. Another breath, another round of compressions. The passengers leaned forward as one, as if their collective will might help drag Richard back from the brink. A baby cried somewhere in the back, the sound sharp and raw against the suffocating silence. And then, his body twitched. Barely, but enough. Evelyn froze for half a heartbeat, her fingers on his pulse. A faint throb met her touch. Weak, fragile. But there. Her chest rose with a shaky exhale, relief mixing with urgency. She placed the mask tighter over his face, her voice firm again. "We've got a pulse, but we're not done. Keep that oxygen steady." Gasps rippled through the rows. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth. The teenage girl whispered, "She's bringing him back." But Richard's eyelids remained closed, his body limp, suspended between life and death. Evelyn wiped her brow with the back of her hand, her eyes narrowing with renewed fire. "Stay with me, Richard Collins," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm outside. "You're not leaving this plane today." The plane shuddered again, turbulence rattling overhead bins, but no one flinched. Every eye in the cabin was locked on the scene unfolding in the aisle. Richard Collins, the man who had mocked, laughed, and paraded his wealth, lay pale and still, his chest rising only because Evelyn forced it to. "Keep the oxygen steady," she ordered Chloe, who clutched the tank with trembling hands. Evelyn checked his pulse again, leaning close, listening. It was there, but so faint she feared it might slip away at any second. She adjusted her position, sweat dripping from her brow, and began compressions once more. The dull thud of her palms against his sternum filled the cabin like a drumbeat of survival. 1, 2, 3. Each push carried a weight that went beyond muscle and bone. It was defiance against death itself. A man in the back whispered, "Is he going to make it?" But no one dared answer. The only reply was the rhythm of Evelyn's hands and the hiss of oxygen through the mask. Richard's head lolled to one side. His face had lost its arrogance, stripped down to something raw, almost childlike in its helplessness. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She had seen that look before, in operating rooms, in emergency wards, in the fragile seconds where a life teetered. But here, thousands of feet above ground, she had only her hands and her will. "Come on," she murmured, pressing harder. "I know your heart still has fight." Chloe's voice cracked. Should we tell the captain?" "Yes," Evelyn snapped, her eyes never leaving Richard. "Tell him we've got a cardiac emergency. He may need to prepare for an emergency landing." Chloe darted toward the front, nearly stumbling in her haste. Evelyn didn't pause. Her arms ached, her knees burned against the carpet, but she refused to slow down. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Again. The cycle of hope and despair. The storm outside roared, lightning illuminating the cabin in violent flashes. For an instant, Evelyn's lined face looked carved in stone, a figure of unwavering resolve. The passengers clung to that image, as if her strength alone might anchor the plane. Suddenly, Richard's body jerked again. A low groan escaped his throat, muffled by the mask. Evelyn froze, her fingers darting to his neck. The pulse, still weak, but stronger now. Her lips parted in relief, though her voice stayed sharp. "He's coming back. Don't stop the oxygen." Gasps broke the silence. A woman covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling in her eyes. The teenage girl whispered, "She's saving him. She's really saving him." Her father nodded, his own eyes wet. Evelyn leaned closer, speaking softly into Richard's ear, words only for him. "You're not done yet. Not today." His eyelids fluttered, a faint movement, then stilled again. His body remained slack, balanced on the razor's edge. Evelyn sat back for a moment, her chest heaving with effort, her hands trembling from exhaustion. But the fire in her gaze had not dimmed. She steadied herself, straightening her shoulders, preparing for another round. Around her, the passengers sat frozen, waiting for the verdict of her hands. And then the captain's voice cracked over the intercom, heavy with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board. Please remain seated. We are preparing for immediate diversion." The cabin filled with gasps. Evelyn pressed her palms together once more, her voice low but steady. "Hold on, Richard. I'm not letting you go." The cabin was drenched in silence, every passenger waiting on the fragile rhythm of one man's pulse. Evelyn's hands hovered over Richard's chest, ready to press again, but her fingers lingered instead at his neck. The faint beat beneath her touch was still there, stronger than before, but not yet steady. "Breathe, Richard," she murmured. "Come back to us." His eyelids fluttered once, then again, as though fighting through a storm only he could see. His chest rose faintly under the mask, each breath shallow but visible now. Evelyn adjusted the strap, ensuring the oxygen flowed clean and steady. Chloe knelt beside them, her eyes wide, her voice hushed. "Is he? He's alive," Evelyn answered firmly, her words like steel holding the moment together. "But we're not safe yet. His heart could fail again." Passengers released the breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. A ripple of whispers spread through the rows, disbelief and awe mingling together. The young girl clutched her father's arm, whispering, "She really saved him." He nodded, his eyes fixed on Evelyn as though watching a miracle unfold. Richard groaned, his head turning slightly against the floor of the aisle. His hand twitched, fingers curling weakly toward his chest. Evelyn caught it, holding it steady with her own. "Easy," she said softly. "You're not out of the woods." His eyes cracked open, glassy and unfocused at first. They darted around, panic flickering until they settled on her face. Confusion filled his expression. His lips parted, a rasp slipping out. "You..." Evelyn gave a single nod, her silver hair catching the glow of lightning through the window. "Yes, it's me. Stay still." For the first time since boarding, Richard Collins looked small, diminished not by wealth or power, but by fragility. His arrogance had drained away with the color from his cheeks, leaving him only a man gasping for life in the aisle of an airplane. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are diverting for an emergency landing. Cabin crew, prepare for descent." The plane jolted slightly as it began its change of course. Gasps echoed, but all eyes quickly returned to Richard and the woman kneeling at his side. Chloe adjusted the oxygen tank, following Evelyn's firm instructions. "Keep him talking if he wakes fully," Evelyn said. "But don't let him try to sit up. His heart isn't ready." Richard blinked, his gaze struggling to focus. I can't breathe right," he whispered, voice brittle as paper. "You are breathing," Evelyn said, her tone calm, almost motherly. "Every breath you take is a victory. Trust me, I know this fight better than anyone." His lips trembled as if he wanted to argue, but no words came. He looked at her differently now, not as a nuisance, not as a poor grandma, but as the anchor holding him in place against the storm. The passengers watched in stunned silence, their judgment from earlier curdling into shame. They had heard his cruel words, seen his ridicule. Now they saw his life cradled in the hands of the woman he had scorned. Richard closed his eyes again, a single tear tracing down his temple, mixing with the sweat that still drenched his skin. Evelyn squeezed his hand gently, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "Don't waste the chance you've just been given." The plane lurched again, beginning its descent through thick clouds, thunder rumbling like a distant drum. Every face in the cabin turned toward the front, waiting for the earth to rise up and meet them. But in the narrow aisle, all that mattered was the fragile thread of life Evelyn refused to let go of. The plane tilted gently as it began its descent, the engines groaning against the storm. Lights flickered along the aisle, and passengers clutched their armrests, bracing for turbulence. Yet no one's eyes left the narrow strip of carpet where Richard lay, tethered to life by Evelyn's unwavering hands. His breathing had steadied, shallow but consistent now, each inhale amplified by the hiss of the oxygen mask. His eyelids opened again, slowly, the dazed fog clearing enough for recognition to settle. He blinked up at her, confusion etched into the lines of his face. "You..." His voice cracked. A whisper dragged over broken glass. "You saved me." Evelyn's expression softened, though her hands never left their post on his pulse and the oxygen flow. "I did what needed to be done, that's all." Richard swallowed. The movement labored. He tried to lift his head, but Evelyn pressed her palm gently against his shoulder. "Don't move," she commanded, her tone firm but kind. "Your heart is fragile right now. Let it rest." For once, Richard obeyed without protest. His chest rose and fell, the arrogance gone, stripped away by mortality. He studied her face, the fine wrinkles etched like rivers, the calm fire in her eyes. "But you're..." Just a... The sentence faltered. He couldn't finish it. Just a what? Evelyn asked, her gaze steady, piercing. He blinked, shame rushing into his pale features. The memory of his own voice, mocking, cruel, echoed back at him, louder than the thunder outside. I can't believe I paid to sit by a poor grandma. The words haunted him now, tasting of bile. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice raw. Evelyn shifted the mask slightly, checking that the air supply was steady. That's the problem with people like you, she said softly, not in anger but in truth. You think you know everything by looking at someone, but all you see is what you choose to see. Passengers shifted in their seats, her words cutting through the cabin, echoing in every silent ear. Chloe, kneeling close, looked at Evelyn with a mix of awe and reverence, as though seeing her not just as a rescuer, but as something larger, something unshakable. Richard's eyes filled with tears he hadn't asked for. They slipped silently toward his temples, mingling with the sweat that still clung to his skin. His lips quivered, as though searching for the apology lodged deep in his chest, but he couldn't form it yet. The captain's voice broke the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for an emergency landing. Please remain seated, seatbelts fastened. Cabin crew, take positions. The plane jolted, the turbulence stronger now as they dipped lower through the storm. Overhead bins rattled, a coffee cup rolled down the aisle, and someone gasped. But Evelyn stayed anchored, her palm steady on Richard's chest. His gaze never left her. Vulnerability had replaced his swagger. Humility pressed into him by the weight of survival. He gripped her wrist with weak fingers, desperation in his eyes. "Don't let me die," he whispered. Evelyn leaned closer, her silver hair brushing his cheek. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. "Not while I still have strength in these hands." Another jolt rattled the cabin, gasps erupting, but Evelyn's calm presence held everyone together. Around her, strangers clutched each other for reassurance. In the center of it all, the man who had mocked her clung now to her very existence. And for the first time in his life, Richard Collins understood what it meant to be powerless, and to place his life entirely in the hands of someone he had once considered beneath him. The wheels screeched against the runway, jolting every passenger forward as the plane touched down. The cabin rattled with the force of the emergency landing, overhead bins groaning as luggage shifted violently inside. People clutched their armrests, knuckles white, but no one cried out. All eyes were still locked on the aisle, where life and death had been wrestling minutes earlier. The engines roared, brakes grinding, until the aircraft slowed and finally shuddered to a stop. A wave of gasps and shaky sighs filled the cabin, relief breaking loose after the storm. Evelyn stayed crouched by Richard, her hand firm on his pulse, her other steadying the oxygen mask. She barely noticed the landing. The only thing that mattered was the faint rhythm beneath her fingertips. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely. Emergency personnel are on their way to meet the aircraft. Please remain seated until further notice." Chloe exhaled in relief, brushing tears from her cheeks. She turned to Evelyn, voice trembling. You saved him." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the mask again, checked Richard's breathing, then nodded once. "He has a chance now. That's what matters." Richard stirred beneath her touch, his eyes blinking open with greater clarity this time. The chaos of landing seemed distant to him. All he saw was Evelyn's lined face above his. His lips moved slowly, words crawling out like fragile confessions. "I should be dead." Evelyn's eyes softened, though her voice carried the weight of truth. "You should, but you're not. Life has a way of humbling us when we least expect it." A ripple of whispers traveled through the rows. Passengers exchanged looks, some with tears in their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They had witnessed cruelty, collapse, and now redemption, all in the span of a single flight. Richard turned his gaze away, unable to meet the stares of those around him. Shame burned hotter than the pain in his chest. He had mocked her, humiliated her, made her the punchline of his arrogance. And yet, here she was, her frail-looking hands the reason his heart still beat. Paramedics rushed through the cabin door, their uniforms bright against the dim lighting. They carried equipment, their voices brisk and professional. "Where's the patient?" one asked, scanning the rows. Chloe pointed quickly. "Here, cardiac arrest." She revived him. Her voice cracked as she gestured toward Evelyn. The medic's eyes widened as they took in the sight. The elderly woman kneeling protectively beside the billionaire, her hands still on him, as though she refused to let go until someone stronger took over. "Ma'am, thank you," one medic said, gently guiding her aside. "We'll take it from here." Evelyn hesitated, then slowly removed her hands, rising to her feet with stiff knees. For a moment, she swayed, exhaustion catching up to her. Chloe caught her elbow, steadying her. Richard's eyes followed her every move, desperation flickering in them. He tried to lift his hand toward her, his voice hoarse. "Don't leave me." The medic placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You'll be okay, sir. We've got you now." But Richard's gaze clung to Evelyn, as if she alone held the thread of his survival. The passengers watched in silence, the scene heavy with unspoken truths. As they prepared to wheel him out, Richard's lips parted again, the words trembling in the air. "I show you everything." And in that suspended moment, Evelyn Parker, the woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a poor grandma, stood taller than anyone else on that plane. The humid night air rushed into the cabin as the emergency doors opened, a sharp contrast to the recycled oxygen inside. Blue and red lights from ambulances flashed across the tarmac, painting the interior of the plane in streaks of urgency. Paramedics pushed a stretcher up the aisle, their voices firm, their hands efficient. Richard was lifted gently onto it, his body weak and uncooperative. He groaned as the straps tightened across his chest, the oxygen mask fogging with every breath. His gaze darted past the medics, searching, desperate, until it landed on Evelyn standing nearby, supported by Chloe. The passengers, still seated, turned their eyes between him and her, their silence charged with the memory of every cruel word he had spoken. Richard felt the weight of their judgment pressing down harder than the straps across his body. "Wait," he rasped, his voice muffled beneath the mask. The medics paused, exchanging a quick glance. He lifted a trembling hand, gesturing weakly toward Evelyn. "Her. I need her." Evelyn stepped forward, her silver hair falling loosely around her face, her cardigan stained with the sweat of the effort. She approached slowly, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes steady on him. Richard's lips parted, his words halting but heavy. "I treated you like nothing, mocked you, humiliated you, and you—" His voice broke. "You gave me back my life." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She studied him, this man who had strutted onto the plane dripping in arrogance, now lying broken and trembling beneath flashing ambulance lights. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but unyielding. "Life doesn't care about money, Richard. When your heart stopped, all that mattered was who was willing to fight for you." A murmur spread through the passengers, some nodding silently, others dabbing at tears. Chloe's eyes glistened as she looked at Evelyn with reverence. Richard swallowed hard, shame burning his throat. "I don't deserve what you did." Evelyn leaned closer, her words sharp enough for only him. "No one deserves kindness, Richard. It's given, not earned. But don't waste it. You've been given another chance. Use it." His tears slipped freely now, streaking down his pale cheeks. The sight of the once proud CEO sobbing in front of strangers struck the cabin like a final revelation. The man who had mocked dignity was now begging for it. The medics prepared to wheel him out, adjusting the stretcher. Richard's hand shot out weakly, brushing Evelyn's wrist. "Promise me, you won't leave, without knowing I'm grateful." Evelyn placed her other hand gently over his, her grip steady. "You don't need to promise me anything. Prove it with how you live after this." The stretcher rolled toward the exit, Richard's eyes never leaving hers until the last possible moment. The passengers, still hushed, began to clap. Not loud, not celebratory, but slow, reverent. A tribute not to Richard, but to the woman who had silenced him with her courage. As the paramedics carried him down the jet bridge, Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders sagging at last. The storm had passed outside, but inside, something far greater had shifted. The terminal was quiet, except for the echo of hurried footsteps and the hum of medical equipment as the paramedics wheeled Richard away. The passengers who had witnessed everything filed slowly behind, their faces still pale with shock, but softened with awe. Some clutched their phones, not to record, but as if unsure how to process what their eyes had seen. Evelyn stepped out last, Chloe steadying her arm as though afraid the woman might collapse now that the adrenaline had worn off. Her cardigan hung loose, damp from sweat, but her posture was upright, her eyes calm. She had carried the weight of a man's life in her hands, and now she carried only silence. Richard, strapped to the stretcher, turned his head weakly, fighting against exhaustion just to keep her in view. His lips pressed against the oxygen mask, his voice muffled but determined. "Please, let her come with me." One of the paramedics looked at Evelyn, then at Chloe. "Family?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head. "No, just a fellow passenger." But Richard's voice rasped through the mask, urgent despite his weakness. "No, she's the reason I'm still here. She's more than that." His eyes pleaded, raw and unguarded. For a moment, no one spoke. The paramedics exchanged a glance and nodded. "All right, she can ride with us to the hospital?" Evelyn hesitated, then stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on the rail of the stretcher. Richard's trembling fingers brushed against hers, the last remnants of strength clinging to the woman who had saved him. "I'll never see people the same way again," he whispered, each word a vow carved into his breath. "I judged you. I thought money made me bigger. But lying there, nothing mattered except your hands, your heart." Evelyn's gaze softened, though her reply carried no pity, only truth. "Remember this, Richard. Dignity and compassion are worth more than all the contracts you'll ever sign." He closed his eyes, tears streaking silently down his face. The arrogance that once filled him was gone, replaced by the fragile humility of a man who had come face to face with his own mortality. As the stretcher rolled toward the waiting ambulance, the passengers in the terminal began to clap again, this time louder, firmer, echoing against the glass walls. Not a celebration of survival, but a recognition of grace, of the invisible strength hidden in a woman he had called poor grandma. Evelyn did not bow or wave. She simply nodded once, her silver hair catching the fluorescent lights as she followed behind the stretcher. To her, it wasn't applause she carried, it was the quiet knowledge that her heart had been given a second chance. Outside, the storm had cleared. The night sky stretched wide and calm, the runway lights glowing like 1,000 silent witnesses. Richard was lifted into the ambulance, Evelyn climbing in beside him. Before the doors closed, she looked back at the crowd of passengers, their eyes still fixed on her. She gave a small smile, a gesture of reassurance, then disappeared inside. The siren wailed, red and blue lights fading into the distance. And with them went the reminder that appearances are nothing more than masks, that true worth lies hidden, waiting for the moment when life demands to see it. Richard Collins boarded that plane believing wealth set him above others. He mocked, he belittled, he laughed at a woman he thought small. But when his heart failed, it was her hands, the hands he had dismissed, that pulled him back from death. Evelyn Parker didn't save him for thanks or recognition. She saved him because true greatness lies in compassion, not in arrogance. That night reminded everyone on board that appearances deceive, and humility is often hidden in the quietest souls. What Richard received was not just a second chance at life, it was a second chance to live with dignity. And if there is hope in this story, it is this. No matter how dark the moment, kindness can still cut through, and a single act of courage can change more than a heartbeat. It can change a life. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And above all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. And before you go, watch the story I leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.